The heat in Phoenix never really lets go, even in November. By the time my shift ended at midnight, the pavement still held the day's warmth like a living thing, and the parking lot outside Sunridge Community Hospital glowed under lights so bright they made my eyes ache. I was 67 years old, 8 months a widow, and I had just worked my 4th consecutive Tuesday night in the medical records department. Frank's retirement fund had looked solid on paper until the market correction that spring, and then the medical bills from his last 6 months, and then the lawyer fees sorting out the estate, and suddenly the numbers stopped adding up the way I needed them to. My daughter Renee had offered to help, but she had 2 kids in middle school and a mortgage in Tucson, and I was not the kind of woman who leaned on her children. I had never been that woman. So when the hospital posted a part-time opening in records management, I applied the same afternoon. The job was fine. Quiet, organized, the kind of work that kept my hands busy and left my mind just occupied enough that it didn't wander toward the empty side of the bed at home. I worked Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays midnight to 7. The night bus had been my plan, but the route that passed our neighborhood on Crescent Hill Drive was restructured in October, and the last run now left at 11:15. Too early for my shift. Too late to pretend it wasn't a problem. My neighbor's granddaughter set up the rideshare app on my phone one Sunday afternoon, walking me through it slowly, the way young people do when they're trying not to seem impatient. The first night I used it, a white Nissan Altima pulled up within 4 minutes, and the driver looked back at me through the rearview mirror and said, "Crescent Hill Drive." His name was Marcus. The app told me that much, along with his 4.9-star rating and a small photo that matched the man in the front seat, somewhere in his early 60s, broad through the shoulders, with close-cut silver hair and the kind of deep-set eyes that had seen a great deal and decided not to be surprised by much anymore. "Long night?" he asked. "Long enough," I said. "Medical records. I just started a few months ago. Night shift suits some people," he said. "I've been on nights most of my life one way or another." There was something in the way he said it, not complaint, just fact, that made me look at him properly instead of at my phone. "How long have you been driving?" "Going on 4 years. Did 31 years with the City Transit Authority before that. Bus driver. They restructured the pension halfway through, so what I thought I'd retire on wasn't quite what I actually retired on." He said it without bitterness, the way you describe weather. "Rideshare fills the gap." I understood that sentence completely. "I'm Dorothy," I said. "Marcus," he said, though I already knew. That was the first Tuesday in November. By the 2nd, he was already positioned near the hospital when my shift ended, his car appearing on my app before I'd even reached the staff exit. I didn't mention it. By the 3rd week, it was simply the arrangement. His white Altima, the same quiet departure from the side entrance, the same easy conversation that asked nothing difficult of either of us. Marcus was a careful man, careful driver, careful talker, careful listener. He never pushed into territory I hadn't opened. When I mentioned Frank once, just in passing, he didn't press for details. He just said, "I'm sorry," and meant it, and then let the silence sit, without trying to fill it with something useful. I learned about him gradually, the way you learn about a person when there's no reason to rush. He had a son in Atlanta he hadn't seen in 2 years, not because of any falling out, but because the distance had grown in the quiet way distances do when everyone is managing their own life and phone calls keep getting postponed. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near the light rail station, drove 6 days a week, sometimes more. He'd had a marriage that ended in his 50s, amicable but still a loss, still something he turned over in his mind on the long stretches of night highway between fares. "You ever get lonely out here?" I asked him one night, somewhere around the 3rd week of December. He was quiet for a moment. "You learn to make the cab feel like company," he said. "Some passengers, you get a whole evening's worth of conversation in 12 minutes. Some you don't. Either way, you're not alone." I had started bringing him coffee by then. The hospital cafeteria made a dark roast that was surprisingly decent if you added cream, and I had taken to filling 2 cups before my shift ended. The first time I handed one through the window, He looked at it the way people look at something they weren't expecting and have decided they are grateful for. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know it, I said. But I've been drinking that coffee alone for 3 months and it's better with company. After that, the coffee was simply part of things, like the route and the time and the easy conversation. We talked about Phoenix, about the way the city had changed in 20 years, about his son and my daughter and the particular loneliness of having raised someone you were proud of who had gone off and built a life very far away. We talked about what it meant to be useful at an age when the world was increasingly polite about not needing you. One night, early January, he told me about the accident. 12 years ago, when he was still driving the city bus. A woman had gotten off at a stop in the wrong part of town, late at night, and he had watched her walk into the dark and thought nothing of it, because that wasn't his job, and people had the right to go where they were going. 3 days later, her name was in the paper. She had been mugged 2 blocks from that stop, badly hurt, hospitalized for a week. She was fine, he said. Eventually, but I've thought about her almost every day since. It wasn't your fault, I said. No, he agreed. But I could have said something. Offered to wait while she called someone. Done something other than watch her walk away. He was quiet for a moment. So now I pay attention to the people getting in and out of my car, to the things they say and the things they don't say. I figure it's the least I can do. I squeezed the coffee cup in my hands and didn't say anything because sometimes the right response to something true is just to let it be true. January passed. February arrived cold by Phoenix standards, the mountains to the north showing their occasional white caps, the nights dropping into the low 40s. I had started sitting in the front seat by then. It happened without discussion. One night, the back door had been accidentally locked and I'd climbed in front, and neither of us said anything about it the following week when I did the same thing. It was a Thursday night in the 3rd week of February when everything shifted. Marcus picked me up as usual, but he didn't pull out of the hospital lot immediately. He sat with the car in park, his hands on the wheel, and I could see in the glow of the dashboard that he was working something out in his head, deciding whether to say it. Dorothy, he said. I need to tell you something, and I want you to hear me out before you say anything. My stomach went still. All right. The man who lives across the street from you. Gray ranch house, blue pickup, usually parked in the driveway. Do you know him? I thought for a moment. Garrett? He's been on that street longer than I have. We wave. I've spoken to him maybe 4 times in 8 years. Why? Marcus turned the car on and pulled out of the lot, but instead of heading toward the freeway, he went east. Toward the industrial side of the airport. I need to drive while I say this. I'm sorry, it helps me think. Marcus. I'm going to take you to your daughter's tonight, he said. Not your house, I'll explain on the way. I looked at him. His jaw was set in a way I hadn't seen before, a careful control over something underneath. You're frightening me. I know, I'm sorry. Please listen. He had picked up the man I knew as Garrett 6 weeks ago. A Wednesday night, late, the man had requested a ride from a bar on Central Avenue. He was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but loose, the kind of drunk that removes the filter between thought and speech. He had been on his phone for most of the ride, talking to someone in a low, urgent voice, and Marcus had tuned it out the way he had learned to tune out passenger phone calls. But then he heard my address. He said Crescent Hill Drive, Marcus said. The specific number. Your number. And he said the woman there was starting to be a problem. The heater in the car suddenly felt like too much. What kind of problem? Marcus reached into the center console and handed me his phone, already open to a notes application. Dates, times, fragments of conversation, all organized by the obsessive precision of a man who had decided to pay attention. 6 separate rides over 6 weeks, the same passenger, the same phone calls. He had picked up Garrett again 2 weeks after that first ride. Sober this time, quieter, but still on his phone, and Marcus had been listening. He heard Garrett mention my employer. Heard him say something about Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. heard him say in a voice Marcus described as flat and deliberate. She sees the truck every morning. That's going to be a problem before long. What truck? I asked. I don't know yet, Marcus said. But Dorothy, last week I drove past your street before picking you up. I do that sometimes just to make sure the route is clear. His truck wasn't in his driveway. It was parked down the block, lights off, at 6:45 in the morning. Right around the time you would have been getting home from your Thursday shift. The world did something strange and tilted. He was watching me come home. I think so. And the week before that, I picked him up again. He was angry this time. On the phone, and he said. Marcus glanced down at the notes. He said, she's going to figure out it's the Ridgeway account. If she pulls those files before we move them, the whole thing falls apart. I stared at the lights of the freeway on-ramp approaching. I don't know what the Ridgeway account is. Do you work with account files? Patient accounts, billing accounts, anything like that? And then I felt it. The slow, cold recognition of something that had been in the back of my mind for weeks, that I hadn't understood as anything more than administrative frustration. We've been flagging discrepancies, I said slowly, since December. Patient accounts where the discharge records don't match the billing summaries. My supervisor thought it was a data migration error from when we switched systems last spring. How many accounts? We've found 11 as of last week. But we weren't finished. My supervisor said we probably find more. I turned to look at Marcus fully. Garrett, what does he do? Do you know? He's listed in the app as a healthcare contractor. I looked him up after the third ride. Marcus took the ramp onto the freeway heading south toward Tucson. Dorothy, I think whatever those discrepancies are, he's involved. And I think he knows you're the one reviewing the files. I sat with that for a long time while the orange lights of the freeway slid over the windshield. A man I had waved to across the street for 8 years. A man who knew my schedule, knew my employer, knew which files I touched. A man who had been sitting in a dark truck at 6:45 in the morning watching my front door. You said you're taking me to my daughter's. Yes. And then we call the police. From there, not from your house. I have the notes, the dates, the times. It's not nothing, Dorothy. It's a pattern. I thought about arguing. I thought about saying it was probably nothing, probably misheard, probably some other address on some other street. I had been telling myself versions of that story for weeks, making the small wrongnesses fit into explanations that required no action. But I had also been watching Frank's decline for 2 years and telling myself versions of that story. And at the end of it, I had learned something permanent about the cost of not seeing what was in front of you. All right, I said. Take me to Renee's. We drove the 40 minutes to Tucson mostly in silence. Renee opened the door in her bathrobe at 1:30 in the morning, took one look at my face and said, Mom, come inside. I didn't have to explain much. The look on Marcus's face in the porch light explained enough. The 3 of us sat at Renee's kitchen table while Marcus pulled up his notes and I called the non-emergency line for the Phoenix Police Department. The officer who answered sounded skeptical in the way that non-emergency operators sound skeptical. But when I mentioned the Ridgeway account and my employer, he put me on hold, and when he came back, his voice had changed. He asked me to stay where I was. He said someone would call me within the hour. The detective who called 40 minutes later was a woman named Carver, and she did not sound skeptical at all. She asked me precise questions about the accounts, the discrepancies, when the review had started and who was involved. She asked about Garrett, his full name, his address, his vehicle. She asked Marcus, whom she spoke to separately for 20 minutes, to send her a screenshot of the notes from his phone. I need you to stay in Tucson tonight, she said when we had finished. Don't go home. Don't contact anyone at the hospital until you hear from me. I didn't sleep. Renee made tea and we sat on her couch while her kids slept upstairs, and Marcus stayed in the kitchen going over his notes again, cross-referencing dates, making sure everything was in order. Around 4 in the morning, I looked at him through the kitchen doorway and thought about the woman who had walked off his bus 12 years ago and into a dark street while he watched and said nothing. He was not watching and saying nothing now. He was rewriting something old and painful, one deliberate action at a time. Detective Carver called at 8:47 in the morning. They had executed a search warrant at Garrett's property at 6 a.m. In a locked filing cabinet in his home office, they found documentation of a billing scheme that had been running for 3 years. Patient records from Sunridge Community Hospital, the 11 accounts my team had already flagged, and 43 more that we hadn't reached yet. False billing codes, duplicate claims submitted to Medicare and private insurers, a separate set of ledgers showing distributions to 3 other individuals, none of whom worked at the hospital, 2 of whom had already been contacted by the time Carver called me. Total fraudulent billing, $412,000 over 37 months. He had a contact inside the records department, Carver told me, someone who had been quietly relocating files before audits. Your review was the first one that went through the right channels and reached files he hadn't moved yet. She paused. He knew your name by the second week of December. I sat down on Renee's couch and pressed my hand flat against my knee to stop it from shaking. The truck outside my house. He was trying to determine your routine. Whether you brought files home. Whether you had documentation at your residence. Another pause. He had also looked up the schedule for your rideshare driver. He knew Marcus's car and his approximate pickup time. I looked through the kitchen doorway. Marcus was standing at the counter with his back to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders even from across the room. He's been arrested, Carver said. Federal jurisdiction given the Medicare component. You can go home, Mrs. Dorothy. You and your driver, you did exactly the right thing. Renee drove me home that afternoon. Marcus followed in his Altima. The gray ranch house across the street was quiet, the blue pickup gone, a strip of yellow tape across the side gate the only sign of what had happened. I stood in my driveway in the February afternoon light and looked at the street I had lived on for 16 years. And thought about all the times I had waved at that house without any awareness of what was happening inside it. Marcus stood beside me on the driveway for a moment before he had to go. You kept notes, I said, from the very beginning. Why? He thought about it. The woman on the bus, he said finally. After what happened to her, I started keeping notes on anything that seemed wrong. Passengers who seemed to be following someone. Situations that fell off. I've had 4 of them in 4 years. Twice it was nothing. Once it turned out to be a domestic situation and I gave the information to the police and I don't know what happened after that. He looked down the street at the ranch house. This time I knew whose address he was saying. I knew your name. That made it different. You could have told me sooner, I said. Not as accusation, just as fact, the way he had described his pension. I could have, he agreed. I was afraid of being wrong, of scaring you over something that turned out to be nothing. He was quiet for a moment. I waited one ride too long. He was watching your house that Thursday morning before I said anything. I should have told you the week before. You told me, I said. That's what matters. He nodded, looking at the ground. The woman on the bus, he said quietly. I've spent 12 years knowing I saw something and didn't act. Now I know I saw something and did. He looked up at me. That's worth more than I can tell you. I reached out and put my hand on his arm, the way I had once put my hand on his shoulder through the front seat of the Altima while he talked about his son in Atlanta. You saved my life, Marcus. You gave me a reason to be paying attention, he said. Every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 2 cups of coffee and you asking how my night had been. Treated me like I was a person worth talking to instead of a function that got you home safely. He almost smiled. You showed me that you mattered, so I made sure I was paying attention when it counted. The federal case took the better part of a year. Garrett and his 3 associates were charged with healthcare fraud, identity theft, and in Garrett's case, stalking. Marcus testified. I testified. His notes became an exhibit. The prosecution called it in court documents a contemporaneous record of unusual detail and reliability. Marcus sat in the witness box in a gray suit and answered every question in the same careful, unhurried voice he used when he told me about the Phoenix traffic, and the coffee and his son in Atlanta, and I watched the jury watching him, and I could see the moment they decided they believed him. Garrett received 9 years. His associates received lesser sentences and cooperation agreements. The hospital conducted a full audit and identified 61 affected accounts. Medicare recovered a substantial portion of what had been lost. I kept working at Sunridge. The night shift and I had reached an understanding by then, and my supervisor had quietly made sure the review team received commendations in the annual report. I sat in the front seat of Marcus's Altima every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and we drove through the Phoenix nights with our coffees, and the conversations kept going the way good conversations do, not finishing so much as continuing from one week to the next. In May, Marcus told me his son had called. They had talked for 2 hours. The son, his name was Darius, which I had known for months by then, had read about the case in an Atlanta news aggregator that picked up the Phoenix coverage, and had called his father and said simply, "Dad, that was you. That was really you?" "He's coming to visit in July," Marcus told me, his voice doing the careful, controlled thing it did when he was trying not to let too much through. "Bringing his girlfriend. Says he wants to see the city." "Phoenix in July," I said. "He's going to have thoughts about that." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. The kind I had heard maybe 5 times in the months I'd known him. It was a good sound in the dark car, with the city lights moving past the windows and the coffee warm in my hand. "Dorothy," he said after a moment, "I want you to meet him when he visits, if that's all right." "I'd like that very much," I said. Darius came in July with his girlfriend, a quiet and observant woman named Tamsin who worked in public health and asked excellent questions about hospital billing systems. We had dinner on a Saturday evening at a restaurant on Roosevelt Row that Marcus had been wanting to try for years. We sat outside under misters that made the July heat almost bearable, and Darius told stories about Marcus as a younger man, the strict bus schedule, the rule about never being late, the way he had kept a notebook in his bus for years, and Darius had always found it slightly eccentric. "I get it now," Darius said. He was looking at his father. "I didn't, then. But I get it now." Marcus looked back at his son across the table, and I did something else to give them the moment. "I still work the night shift. I still bring 2 coffees to the curb when the white Altima pulls up. Some nights we talk the whole 12 minutes, and some nights we ride in the comfortable silence of people who no longer need to fill it. My daughter Renee calls every Sunday, and I have begun to call her on Wednesdays too, which is new. Which is something the last year taught me to stop postponing. Last month a woman started in our department, just transferred from the day shift, nervous in the particular way people are nervous when they're learning a new system and don't want to show it. I found her at her desk 40 minutes after the shift started, staring at a screen full of accounts with the expression of someone who had privately decided she might be in over her head. I brought her a coffee from the cafeteria. I sat down beside her and said, "The first month is the worst part. After that it starts to make sense." She looked at me with such transparent relief that I had to look away for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You have no idea, but I do. I know exactly what it means to have someone notice that you are struggling and decide that noticing is enough reason to act. I know what it costs, which is almost nothing, and what it returns, which is sometimes everything. Be kind, not because it is efficient or strategic, or because the universe keeps a running ledger. Be kind, because the person in front of you is fighting something you know nothing about, and your small attention might be the thing that makes them feel seen, and feeling seen might be the thing that makes them keep paying attention, and their attention might be, on some cold February night when everything depends on it, the thing that saves your life. Or it might be the thing that saves theirs. You never know which it will be. That's not a reason to wait.